We're back. The second hour of day 2 of Radio Days 2025. In the first hour, I was in the live room with my colleagues listening to the podcast from the Bearded Behaviourist last year. This year, in fact. And we made a few extra comments on it ourselves. It was an intense listen. I want to play another of our podcasts this session, and it's from Gina Karlberg, a researcher, a young person with a background in autism, working for an organisation that's a PBS organisation. Often ABA and PBS are linked together because of a behaviourist route. In the UK, that's possibly a little bit unfair because they're quite different ways of dealing with us as autistic people. Gina's interesting, partly also for us because we're involved with a co-production with her organisation, and it looks at the way services are presented to autistic people, and we've used the radio model with that organisation to work in a co-production that we felt had equity in the communication, and we're happy with that. That's something that we're willing to pursue in the coming year. The times you get to have a co-production with a professional organisation, whether that be an ABA-based organisation, a PBS-based organisation, or an organisation that sees itself at the cutting edge of neurodiversity, it's all important to us. Let me play what Gina said.
We speak our words, we listen.
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 Okay, so we had a bit of to and fro, didn't we? And you had an idea of a podcast series that you were going to start number 1 of today. Give me a quick intro and the kind of things that you're going to say today.
So some of the things that I thought could be a good idea to talk about is something called non-aversive reactive strategies, and how we implement those in the context of multi-element support.
Okay, so you're already talking jargon.
Yes, I will try my best to explain what I'm talking about and express these things more in layman's terms. We can actually be quite difficult to change the way you're speaking and change the words you're using, so on.
Yeah,
I'll try my best.
I feel for you. I think what you've just said there, Gina, is actually another big subject. We just had a conversation before recording, and you say to yourself, or you say to me, a few technical terms, and I immediately ask you during the recording, will you explain those terms as we go along? And that's a communication thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever the autistic population see the way the professionals communicate,
Mm-hmm.
they use their own secret language of acronyms and terms, often without giving us the opportunity to find out what those terms are. So we get left behind in the conversation. Do you think the profession's doing that purposefully?
Um, Perhaps a little bit to a certain extent. It has been like that. The purpose has not been to consciously make other people not understand, but it's been considered quite important that we have our own professional language with technical terms that we can use, which makes it easier in our own profession. Perhaps that has been seen as more important, at least historically, than making efforts to ensure that other people also understand. I personally feel that this is one of the most important things that we still have to work with in our field. We have to make sure that the support that we provide to other people is inclusive, of course, and for that it's really crucial that we're expressing ourselves in ways that other people can understand.
Could I just ask you to turn your camera off so that you don't distract me? I mean, you're
Yes,
lovely to
well,
look at, but really we just
well,
want to concentrate on the words.
of course. There we go. It's a serious issue, and it's something that I've thought about many times. Yeah.
I'll do an introduction to the program, Gina, now, and then you can take us wherever you wish during this recording. Hello, Gina, and welcome to Autistic Radio. And as you know, we're making a series of conversations with the behaviourist community, the profession that uses behaviourist principles in various ways with various different outcomes. We feel it's important to have this conversation with the behaviourist community because the impression the behaviourist community has of the autistic community is one of our anger or our trauma or our misunderstanding or just plain hate for anything that reminds them of things that they've seen in the past. So when we extend this conversation out with you, Gina, just before we started recording, I asked about some terms that you immediately put into a sentence. And we discussed it a little about the way behaviourists communicate and the terms they use, how that affects the community. What would you say about that?
I say that it's definitely very important that we're as inclusive as possible and we make a proper effort when we're working together with other people, whether that's the people that we support or other professionals, that we use words that everyone can understand. And that if we do use technical words that are common to use in our own field, that we explain these words. And try to make it as understandable and clear to other people as possible.
I think that's important for us as a community. When we look at the language used in the behaviourist literature, it feels viscerally offensive. Do you get where I'm coming from that?
Yes, I do, because I've actually seen some research on this. And it was quite interesting because this research introduced behavior analytical terms to people outside our field. And results show that people actually dislike a lot of these terms. You could assume that it's just that people don't like scientific words in general, but that wasn't the problem. It was words specific to the behavioral science and the behavior analytic field that people didn't like. It's definitely something that I'm personally very conscious of. And I think that overall, as a field, this is something that we can still work on.
So, did I understand this correctly? There was some research that looked at the language, the scientific language that behaviourists use, and they take it to the general population and they say, if these terms were used, what would you feel about them? And they came up with a negative feeling, even though those same people are quite okay with scientific terms generally. It was the specific terms the behaviorists were using that people found offensive in the general population. Is that right?
Yes, that sums it up perfectly. And that's exactly the results. It's just one study, so maybe we need to be cautious about interpreting those results, but still, I found it incredibly interesting and quite enlightening just to see that on paper like that.
Yeah, my colleague is making an interesting point in the text. Raymond says, are we now suggesting that the language itself is triggering? I think we're using this word triggering in a very broad sense, in a colloquial sense.
Yes, I think it certainly could be for some people. So that's something that we have to take very seriously.
I've been speaking with behaviorists for quite a while now, and every single time they introduce a whole group of concepts with acronyms that I've never come across in normal life, and there's an expectation that there are pieces of knowledge from various people that will be quoted that are required. I'm wondering if the real point of finding a communication between the professionals, the behaviorists, and my population is to just get these words simplified and understood when we're having our talks.
Yeah, you're making a very good point, Jules. That is actually incredibly important. And I can't promise that I won't use any technical words at all. It's actually a bit of an art to explain something that you've studied and you've learned these words and you use them yourself with your colleagues. And then when you try to explain this to other people from outside of your field of work, it's actually the challenge to explain things in different ways. If no one even understands what we're saying, right? That's not particularly inclusive or very helpful.
Okay, on the other side of this, as Autistic Radio, we want to come some way towards you. We want to learn some of these terms as we go along. That's fine. And Raymond says, feel free. We like to do research sometimes. So,
Thank you so much for that.
what is it
Yeah,
you wanted to introduce to us today?
I'm of the opinion that in PBS, to reach our goals of supporting people to improve quality of life and live the lives they want to live, we need to offer truly holistic, a comprehensive support. So my reference point and perspective is a human rights-based multi-element model of support. This means that it's not really enough to focus on the basic needs of people. It's important, but it's not enough. We have to make sure that we do more, support people to have a roof over their head, decent health, and support with daily self-care, for example. Quality of life for many people is about the future as well, and making sure that people can have hopes and dreams and goals to strive for, both small everyday related goals, but also larger ones. This relates to what we in PBS called proactive strategies. Proactive strategies relate to the things that we do to support someone to increase their quality of life. And that's really important. And that should be the majority of the strategies that we do. Those should be proactive strategies. So in PBS, we often work with people who engage in behaviors of concern. And those behaviors can often be dangerous to that person themselves or to other people around them. So, of course, then we have to do something.
Okay.
We have to do something to help.
Okay, so let me start at the beginning here. You start with a client from the point of view of behaviors of concern. We'll triage this, we'll deal with this presentation of behaviours that's difficult for the rest of our society first. That's the lead into this. But then you say that there's a process that comes after it. Am I correct on that?
Yes, I would say that in PBS, because we work with people with behaviors of concern, that can be self-injury, for example. Maybe they're harming themselves. That's perhaps why a case has been referred to us. Then we're going to work with this person and we're going to be focusing on the proactive strategies, which is all about increasing quality of life. And by doing that, behaviors of concern will often decrease automatically. However, sometimes we need particular strategies to use in a crisis situation, and that's where we use reactive strategies. Reactive strategies are strategies that we use in crisis situations when someone is engaging, for example, in a dangerous behavior of concern. And then we need a strategy to de-escalate that situation, as opposed to proactive strategies, which are about increasing quality of life, generally speaking. Last time we focused on the proactive strategies, and I was talking about how important it is that our support is holistic and that we think about all of the different aspects in someone's life that matters, that so that it's not too narrow, that we don't just focus on the more basic needs, that we're supporting people to have hopes and dreams for the future and so on. The particular type of reactive strategies that are used in a multi-element model for support are quite different from the reactive strategies that have traditionally been used.
Okay, so it's the difference between how people, when they're forced to use reactive strategies. I'm sure what you're saying really is that most people in their profession would prefer to spend their time in proactive strategies because they're supporting. It feels as though you're building blocks and helping somebody, but you are forced into situations because of people's personal circumstances, violence or whatever, to react to them.
Yes, I would say that when carrying out a multi-element support plan, the reactive strategies can typically be phased out, and that's also the goal. But while we're waiting for the effect of the proactive strategies, all the quality of life related strategies to take effect, while we're waiting for that, we might still need to use reactive strategies in the meantime.
You see, for me, I think you've already uncovered one of the difficulties that the autistic population have with behaviorism there. And it's about the change from proactive strategies to reactive strategies. And it's all down to the individual practitioner, isn't it? How much they have the dial pointed towards reactive strategy and how much they have the dial pointed to proactive strategy. I think that there's a possibility that the reactive strategy can be much more important for the autistic person. It becomes so big to them that they are no longer happy about the proactive strategies that you might offer. It's almost as though we are immediately hurt by the reactive strategy to make the proactive strategy impossible. Do you see where I'm kind of come from here?
Yes, I think I do. And that's why it's so important that the reactive strategies are done right. I completely see where you're coming from. I can definitely see how that would happen. if the reactive strategies are done like they have been done, traditionally speaking. Reactive strategies don't have to be bad or aversive. They have often been used like that in the past. That's what I wanted to talk about and explain. The important thing to understand is that behaviors of concern are often messages to other people around them. It's about saying that something isn't right for that person. So they
Are
are
you saying
messages.
behavior is communication?
Yes, you could put it that way, or you can say that behavior is a message. Yes, absolutely. The important thing is to understand that, and not only understand, but also listen to those messages. We have to respond and listen to these messages that are expressed through behaviors of concern in a crisis situation. And the science of behavior can be very helpful here. But also, as practitioners, we need to use our reflective abilities here and reflect in that moment and think, what is this person trying to say now? And what has happened to them in the past that makes them use this particular behavior to communicate under these particular circumstances? And it can be quite difficult to reflect in the moment. When during a particular incident, when emotions are running high, but this is something that can be learned as a skill by practitioners.
So, to summarize in my layman's language, somebody like myself who is having a struggle with their own emotions because of a number of different things that they can't yet bring to mind or communicate, as a human being, I'm likely to behave in emotional ways, thrash about, etc. And you're saying if somebody comes into that to help that situation, they have to be extremely careful not to just be reactive themselves. One
Yeah,
reaction creates
absolutely.
another reaction.
Yeah, that's really important. And functional reactive strategies, the way that they are used in a multi-element support plan, is always about listening to the message that the person is trying to express and then respond to that message using our reflective abilities, by showing empathy and compassion, and ultimately meeting that person's need in that situation. If we know what the person is trying to say, for example, if they're trying to escape a difficult situation, then we'll support them to escape that situation. We'll support them to leave. If the message, for example, is that someone is frustrated about certain aspects of their life or about life in general, if we know that that's the message of the particular behavior, then we can use active listening. We can show that we're there to listen and to help. And these strategies usually de-escalate the situation completely, because that means that the person feels heard and understood, respected and listened to.
Wow. Look, Gina, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking this sounds perfect, but this requires the professional to have a superhuman tolerance that, unless you have got some kind of very specific training program that is going to change your professionals into this superhuman tolerant person, I think we might be kidding ourselves here.
I would like to respectfully disagree on that, because there is actually a training program on this in multi-element support, and it has actually worked incredibly well. Now, the problem is that these types of strategies that I'm talking about are not widely known and used. And that's because in society and in my field as well, there are these cultural beliefs that behaviors need consequences, actions need consequences. And I think in society overall, a lot of people assume that if we respond, like I described, with empathy or by meeting that person's need, then that can make the situation worse and it can make the behavior more common in the future. So, in behavior analytical terms, we would say that the behavior would get reinforced. So, that's a really, really common and very strong assumption culturally. And these assumptions can be really hard to change.
In layman's terms, again, if you bend and let the child get away with it, they will do it
Mhm.
more. That's effectively what you're saying. You're saying that we are culturally, usually in most of our societies, we see a child does a behavior, we don't like that behavior, so we punish the child for the behavior. If we don't punish the child for the behavior, we think that we are encouraging that behavior and making it happen more.
Yes, exactly. This is a really common belief, but it's actually not the case. It seems to make sense that if we don't, for example, punish the behavior, or if we respond by giving the child what they want in this situation, the behavior will be reinforced. And that might happen if this was the only thing that we did. But if we do this in the context of a multi-element support plan, it's not going to happen. In a multi-element support plan, a reactive strategy has nothing to do with the future. You're thinking about whether that behavior is going to be reinforced or not, because all you're thinking about is de-escalating the situation in a way that is safe and maintains the dignity and also maintains the relationship between the people involved in that situation in the best way. That's all you're thinking about in that particular moment. When it comes to potential effects of the behavior in the future, this will be dealt with by the proactive strategies. That's the role of all the quality of life related strategies. So, if we implement proactive strategies simultaneously, if we do this at the same time, then the behavior won't become more frequent. It won't happen more often than before, just
Okay.
because we meet the person's need. Because the proactive strategies will prevent that from happening.
Okay. So to simplify again, because you can't go against one of the basic parts of human society, which is asking people to conform in certain situations, and if they don't conform, punishing them for not conform. That goes throughout everything that we do as human beings. We probably do it too much. You're not saying to people they're wrong feeling that, or all of their cultural assumptions that they've been taught from their own childhood are wrong. What you're saying is they're correct. If you only did that, you would screw it up. You would encourage people and reinforce difficult behaviors. But if you have this multiple approach around it, then that is such a tiny part of it that it fades away and it doesn't happen because these other supports, these other proactive elements take that away. Have I understood it?
Yes, absolutely. And you summed that up absolutely beautifully. Yes, that is exactly what I meant by all of this.
Can I bring in what Raymond is saying in the text before you
Yes.
go on and before you explain? Raymond says reactive as open to the moment, question mark, and he thinks that that sounds progressive. I don't know quite what Raymond means there. Does it mean something to you?
I'm not sure actually. I think I'm gonna need to think about that one.
He says fluidity within a structure. Raymond, do you want to put voice to this? You said reactive as open to the moment. in the moment sounding progressive.
By open to the moment, I'm meaning not carrying in any preset plan or prejudice or assumption, understanding the communication, the message that's being displayed. And then instead of, reacting in a preset way, being open to it. And then within that available structure, as Gina explained, then working proactively, having absorbed the messages.
Yeah. Do you know what worries me here, Ray, is that it's the interpretation of the message behind the behavior. That's where I think the communication has often broken down. I don't trust non-autistic professionals to ascribe correctly the communication that is being offered to them. And I think behaviorism has a whole history of ignoring the communication that comes from the behaviors. And Gina is now trying to say that there's a whole progressive element within behaviorism that is trying to understand what the person is communicating by their behaviors. But I don't trust that they understand what those communications are, and they need us to interpret them for them.
Okay, finally, that's a reading. Yeah, I'll take that on board. But I'll stand with what I put.
So, Jules, in response to that, first of all, I do agree that interpreting the message, it's something that can be quite difficult actually, and that practitioners can need specific training to do because, like I said, it's especially difficult in situations in which emotions are running high. So we really need to learn coping skills ourselves, for example, to maintain calm and to be able to reflect, be very attentive to what's going on for that person. The more we know about this person, the more we get to know them, the easier this will be. The more we know about the history, the more we know who they are, the easier it is to understand what people are saying. We have to really, really try and get to know the people that we're supporting. There is really interesting research that shows that when we know what the person is trying to say, when we know what the message is, and we do respond by meeting their need in that situation, that leads to de-escalation of that behavior 100% of the time. Whereas using other strategies, like aversive strategies or restrictive strategies, are not effective at all in de-escalating the situation. So that means that using other types of strategies, I would say the opposite to the types of strategies that I described, typically escalates the situation. It makes things worse a lot of the time. So this is something that when I do trainings in PBS and I bring this up, some support workers say to me that they have noticed this. Anecdotally, they have noticed that when you ignore the message, for example, or you reprimand the person, for example, or even restrain them, this tends to escalate things and make things worse. People have noticed this already, but there is now really, really good research conducted by Nicola Crates and Matthew Spicer in Australia. And there's some other research as well. When you look at past incidences of behaviors of concern, then it's really clear that meeting the person's need, listening to that message, and responding by strategies that are specific to the message rather than ignoring or trying to punish the behavior or implementing some type of aversive consequence.
I can really get behind this, Gina. And I'm
Yeah,
sure...
this is really what works. So it's
Yeah.
not just that it's more ethical, it's more efficient as well, was what I was trying to get across as well. So that's really important because this is relatively new research that not everybody knows about yet. And it's still something that we need more research on. The initial studies that we have really show that this is what works. So this is what's more ethical, more compassionate, but also more efficient.
Okay. So I would say, that kindness and empathy, to understand the communication behind the behavior, has short-term benefits, immediate benefits to de-escalate the situation, but also has medium and long-term benefits to reduce the opportunity for those behaviors to reoccur.
Absolutely, that's right.
I can buy into this. You know, I'm representing an autistic organization. I can say, yeah, if you take me and you try and restrain me, you might end up in hospital and me in prison. That's happened in my life before. People have tried to restrain me because they are not understanding my communication over a period of time until we get into the denouement, the actual physical situation. What you would need to do in that circumstance for me is to let the hell go of me, get away from me, be silent, and give me the opportunity to regroup myself. Give me the time to settle myself. That will save you from having to put me in restraint, and that will save me from breaking your face. Do you understand?
Yes, of course, it's better for everyone as well. And when I do PBS trainings in this, I want support workers to buy into this. So I do explain to them that from their own point of view, from a point of safety as well, this is much safer for them. It's better for the person and it's better for people around them. But it's really important that it happens in the context of a multi-element support plan. It's the proactive strategies need to be implemented at the same time. We need to be looking at what's going on for that person, what would they like to change in their lives, how can we support them in different ways. We need to do this at the same time. I will never forget this really powerful example that was told to me by Jeff Potter and Matthew Spicer, who are pioneers in the work with non-aversive functional reactive strategies and multi-element support in Australia. So if we imagine a situation when you come home from work, you sit down to watch TV. And then after a while, you hear the front door open and it's your partner coming back from work. But instead of closing the door gently, they slam the door really hard so that everything vibrates on the walls. So how are you going to respond to this situation? You have approximately two types of options. Either you could say something like, why did you slam the door like that? I didn't appreciate that. It's really bad for the door. I think you should go back out and come in again and close the door gently this time. Or you could say something like, what's going on? Is everything okay? Did something happen at work today? Do you want to have a chat? Perhaps a cup of tea or a cold beer or whatever it might be that you think this person might need in that moment. So what type of strategy are you going to use? Well, I think most people would say that they would use the second strategy. They would respond to their partner's distress with empathy and ask them if they want to have a chat about what's happened, because this is much more likely to support the partner to feel calm and safe, so that they're in a space where they can self-regulate. Most people would choose the second type of strategy in this situation. And I think this is quite important, because it seems that when it comes to people that we know, then that we have close relationships with, we have a more intuitive understanding that we can respond with empathy and meet their need in that situation. We don't necessarily have to say to them that they should have closed the door nicely. We don't have to say that to them in that moment, because that's more likely to just escalate the situation. And if we really feel that it's important to talk about closing the door nicely, we can save that to a time when everyone's calm and regulated, if we feel that it's really important to say that later on. But the main thing is that it's so much better if we can support other people in these types of situations to feel calm and show that we're listening. Because really often what someone wants when they're engaging in distressed behaviors or behaviors of concern is to see and hear that someone is listening. Someone is listening with empathy, and someone is recognizing the emotion behind that behavior. That is often enough to support someone
Okay,
to self-regulate.
right. I'll use myself as an example. I've had a difficulty. I arrived back at home and my wife hears me slamming the door before coming up the stairs. And she's not going to choose strategy number one because she's not my parent. She doesn't have to explain to an adult that damaging the door is an issue. She immediately sees that as a communication of me frustrated. So by the time I've reached the top of the stairs, if I haven't organized myself a little bit, having realized I've slammed the door, her best strategy, and the one she often uses, is to say nothing, but look at me as though she knows that something has happened and she's open for me to communicate. And then I will communicate. So in your second strategy, I think there's a difference to create that open communication with the person when the person is autistic. And I think that is not understood by professionals. I think the professionals are expecting a neurotypical response to things. I think we have a long way to go as different vantage points. The autistic community, individuals like myself, and the professionals like Gina who are reaching out for more understanding. So let's carry on this conversation over the next year with Autistic Radio and see whether we can have influence and exchange ideas. We'll be moving into the next room now, and it's the 444. The 444 is a regular show that's normally here every Sunday. And during radio days, we have one every day at 4:44. See you there.